Hey there. Welcome to GSPN's ongoing free agency Milwaukee Bucks coverage. And boy, oh boy, despite me thinking the Bucks were done in free agency, the Bucks turns out we're not done. And maybe they're still not done. The roster's full now. I don't know. I'm not ruling out anything at this point. I'm Ty Windisch, joined by the esteemed Jordan Treske, rocking an extremely clean hat, by the way, Jordan. How's it going, sir?
I am excited. I'm excited. If people are joining us live,
Yeah.
um, we are reacting to probably easily the biggest move the Bucks have made this summer, draft included.
I think that's fair to say. Gary Trent Jr. Have we said it already? The Bucks signed Gary Trent Jr. According to one of the newsbreakers. I don't really even check which one it is anymore, but to a veteran, it's presumably a veteran minimum contract. I mean, it could technically be like they salary dump Pat somewhere and give him a couple more million on the non-taxpayer MLE. They might have to also dump Marjan. That's a little tricky. The important thing is he has agreed to terms at the very least. So Gary Trent Jr. will be a Buck. And I think for a team where I think we felt good about the rotation and the roster, but the one question mark was okay, who starts at the two? Is it Torian Prince who maybe slots down? Is it DeLon Wright who maybe, I think we really like as a bench piece, but I don't know if you really want him like starting games. The player we thought, the ideal starting two guard was not Gary Trent Jr., right? It was kind of the opposite of Gary Trent Jr. in a lot of ways. But I think when you get to a certain point where you have no financial flexibility outside of veteran minimum, and there's just not really many players who are like at least like even like good one-way players available at this point, much less two-way players. I think you kind of just have to be like, let's just be open to the possibilities. And also, I mean, there's only so many guys who are good friends with Damian Lillard, I guess. So I think that certainly seemed to help quite a bit here. And, I don't want to say it's all Dame or anything, but it has been like quite the trio of free agents that they've signed with Dame on board this offseason. And we do know he was campaigning for Gary Trent Jr. We know he also tried to get them Haywood Highsmith as well, which is kind of fun and exciting. I didn't even know they were really friends, but I guess so. Didn't work with Highsmith, did work with Trent. A lot of talking, really just to say, this is not the ideal fit we wanted. We did the whole Derek Jones Jr. matrix and who can be the athletic defender. But when you get a guy who's been like an 18, 17 point per game scorer, who's played at a really high level, who's just like a very effective offensive player, I think you just kind of have to be happy with the result anyway.
Yeah, it turns out all the questions from the last, week and a half since the Torian Prince signing, and
Yeah.
obviously DeLon right before that. Turns out it's who is the fifth starter? It's no one on the team.
Yeah.
It's Gary Trent Jr. Yeah, this is best player available. I kind of am shocked that his market just didn't really develop. I mean, part of that is just the new financial restrictions that just face a lot of teams.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm not saying he's this kind of, future all-star or anything like that, but he's clearly a serviceable starter on a
Yeah.
winning team. He's done that with Toronto before they kind of fell into this decline. Um, I just think from the Bucks perspective, reading a lot of the national analysis of their offseason, see a lot of people just being like, oh, why aren't they doing anything? Everything's been quiet. It's like they lump them in with like Miami, Denver. Denver's kind of in this holy pattern with their moves that were reported, but it's not official and all that stuff. And I'm just like, we're kind of getting lost through like the forest and the trees. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like they only had minimum deals to deal with. So that you're already priced out with anything that you do. Like the Haywood Highsmith thing, they can only do offer so much. And if the current team is going to be willing to give him what he got from like Miami or in this case Toronto just walked away from the table from Gary Trent Jr. That's how the Bucks can kind of strike, and they have done it before. But I just felt like a lot of like the general analysis, and I'm not trying to throw a lot of people under the bus, but the most recent Jake Fisher article kind of insinuated it's like, well, why the Bucks can only do so much, but it's still like a disappointing offseason. I can understand that sentiment, especially when you see Paul George go to the 76ers or Boston bring back everybody and just spend more money than their owner is going to pay because he's selling the team.
Yeah.
I just think like it's like this is what they can only do. We got sucked into like the Brook trade rumors, the Pat and Bobby trade rumors that have always persisted. But if you're keeping everybody back, if you're keeping the starters intact, you move on from Malik Beasley, who didn't get the payday that he was seeking. You arguably get a player that might be better than him on
I
both
think clearly
ends of the
better.
floor.
I think clearly
Yeah,
better. Yeah.
I think that the what you it's comparable with obviously what they do with just 3-point gunning, but like Gary Trent Jr. is a very good defender, and it's not like he's all defense or anything like that, but like I immediately feel a lot more comforted by the fact that he's going to be asked to guard the hardest perimeter or the biggest scorer on the other team versus Malik Beasley, who had good moments, would have good nights, but then you see the other flip side of it where he gets benched in the first quarter because he just doesn't have the same level of focus. There's a lot
Yeah.
of points I was making.
No, I think they're all good ones. To the Stats Williams from ESPN Stats and Info pointed out what Gary Trent Jr. is one of 4 players to have 500 made threes and 300 steals over the last 3 seasons. The other 3 are Fred VanVleet, Anthony Edwards, and Tyrese Halliburton. And I think, again, steals does not make you a great defender. I don't think Gary Trent Jr. is, but I think he's at least a solid defender for his size. He's not going to be switching up. Chris and Giannis are going to have to carry weight defensively, one more than the other. But I do think that he is the kind of player that at least if you can just at least be disruptive and force some turnovers, lead to some offense like that can make up for. I remember when Steph, I think, led the league in steals one year, and it was like, yeah, he's still gonna get picked on by LeBron. Guess what? Like 90% of the league is like, you can be that
Yeah.
great offensively and force some turnovers, you can make up for it. So I think that's excellent. I think you look at just the pure offensive production. I think comparing Beasley and Gary Trent Jr. is fair. Beasley has had one season above around like the 11, 12 point per game area, and that was that short season in Minnesota, 37 games. He scored 19.6 per game. Trent, the last 4 years, has been at 17 points per 36 minutes or more. And I'm using per 36 because the most recent year, they pretty much relegated him to a bench role as the year went on, and they were just leaning into the young guys, which really hurt his per game scoring. The other difference between them, though, you look at Beasley these last couple of years. So starting with 21-22, his last Wolves year, he took 8.1 threes to 2.72s per game, 8.1 to 3.4 the next year, and last year with Milwaukee, 6.9 to 2.3. Gary Trent Jr. has been a lot closer to 50-50 on threes and twos while scoring more, which tells you he's not just a gunner from 3. Like, he's able to score
Yeah.
from 2. He's able to do more than just take those threes. He's not a significantly better passer. He gets like a couple assists per game, not much. Not a great rebounder, but just that level of scorer on this offense is very intriguing to me. You can't really hide anyone against the Bucks anymore. Like, if you have a little point guard, I mean, you're going to put him on Trent, I'm sure, but he's like a really good player. I mean, they're going to do Trent Giannis pick and pops. They're going to do Chris screening for guys. Like, there's not going to be anywhere to hide. And I just think we'll probably see more teams even try and get extreme and be like, you know what? We'll put the guy on Brook Lopez. Like, we'll make you post up Brook. Like, we'll make you do that. I think the Bucks will be okay doing that as well. I mean, Lopez has really good chemistry with Dame. And the other thing about it is, besides just like the starting lineup itself, they're going to be able to stagger these 4 excellent offensive players through every game now. Plus, you add in DeLon Wright, where we've talked about his playmaking. I think they're very set up to go like, we obviously hope no one gets injured, but if we're without Giannis or Chris for a week, we're still going to be a great offense. We're not, and we don't need to ask Dame to do everything to do it, right? It doesn't have to be like the playoffs when the other guys were missing time. We can produce a bunch of points. I think their defense will not be great with this roster. I think that's okay. Like, I think they'll be that good offensively, and they'll be able to figure it out in playoff time on that end. But I think just like the offensive firepower they have now is really exciting to me. As someone who thought they went too offensive last year, I still am excited when you add a player like this.
Yeah, I think your point of I've always believe that he's more of a 3-level scorer for whatever
Yeah.
that means for like a role player like him than Beasley was. I just felt like Beasley just didn't have enough juice on the ball when he was, getting closed out on and had to kind of venture in. Like he just kind of seemed lost, like possession by possession.
Yeah.
Gary
I
Trent
don't know
Jr.
how
can,
he had a 19-point per game season. I expected so much more from him on everywhere but three, and it was not there in Milwaukee.
yeah, that's the tough thing too. I think if you really think about this, not just keep playing this comparison, but
Yeah.
considering that you bring in Malik Beasley around this time last year, thinking that he was going to play next to Drew Holiday. So that is a nice like complementary skill set. Gary Trent Jr. now comes in playing against Damian Lillard, someone he's already played with.
Yep.
Beasley had to kind of figure that out with Dame. Trent Jr. doesn't obviously have to do that. He's also coming from a Toronto team where he's like one of the few spacing threats that they had. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's been a couple years since they moved on from Kyle Lowry, and then you think of the point guards like Fred VanVleet kind of it, it's very playable off him, but it's not the same level of like Lowryness, I guess, for lack of a better
Well, and
word.
it's just, I mean, they went from both to only one of them, too. So it's just like, even if they
Yes.
are comparable players, you're still that much worse off.
Yeah. And I just think offensive wise, it's pretty seamless. It's just, the Giannis Gary Trent Jr. connection is going to be thriving pretty much immediately. You
Yeah.
can
The
see the
old, the
Tony
old
Snell,
Grayson, yeah, the Grayson Tony Snell actions are going to be easy for them.
and then a little bit off the bounce like juice that you just didn't have with Beasley, or even we want to see the young guys like Andre Jackson Jr. and AJ Green kind of give a little bit of lift, but they're not there yet, and it's part of the deal that if you want the Bucks to contend, you're gonna have to concede that these guys are development guys. You want to see them get rotation minutes, but when it comes time to thinking about the next starter and all that stuff, you have to make that leap of faith of this guy can handle this. And obviously the Bucks were not sitting on their
I
laurels. You know
mean,
what I mean? Like,
they literally showed John Horst on the phone at Summer League watching nobody look great in terms of the young guys outside of my Chris Livingston agenda. Like, he may have actually been talking to Gary Trent Jr.'s representation in that moment when the ESPN broadcast was like, oh, the Bucks haven't done very much. It's, here's Horst. And like, he was literally making this happen. It's very funny to me how this all came together in the span of like 2-3 days here. But yeah, I think. How do you think defensively they're going to be this year? With not just because of Trent, I'm not going to say they're going to be a bad defense because of Gary Trent, but obviously, this is less minutes for a player like Andre Jackson Jr. Certainly minutes for a player like Chris Livingston or Marjon Beauchamp. I mean, I don't know how much any of those specific guys is helping you defensively anyway, based on their just consistency. But do you think this team is going to look like compared to what we saw last year on the whole? Where do you think they'll rank out?
um, they obviously got better under Doc. I mean, there was no room but up, or to
Yeah,
go nowhere to go but up with going to Doc over Griffin. I agree. I don't think they have all the pieces there to be at minimum a top 10 defense. I think Doc just has a better structure obviously in place. But
yeah,
when you think of malleable, versatile defensive options, it's Giannis at 4 or 5. Torian Prince, obviously, he helps and he's gonna have a lot of minutes. He gives you a little bit of um kind of insurance when you're moving on, or like you know Brooks not on the floor. If you want to play more switching defense, that kind of helps. Andre Jackson Jr. We obviously want him to get minutes, but he's still not there as like slotting down, take on two guards. He's kind of more 3-4
yeah,
type defender in that way. And DeLon Wright obviously helps, but now his minutes are not going to be as much as one thought when they signed him and all that stuff. It's just not all there. On top of just like you have to factor in Dame, you have to obviously factor in Chris, whose mobility is obviously a bit of a question mark. I don't think this is going to be. I think if we expect them to be a league average defense, that will probably be happy. It's not anybody. It's not something that we want,
yeah.
but honestly, it's kind of similar to just like you have to make it work with your best players available, and if you what's the old phrase of we live with what we're going to give up kind of thing, and
Yeah.
if you expect this offense to be one of the best in the league, that's obviously a concession worth making.
Yeah, and I think I don't think you're a much worse defensive team because you're starting Gary Trent Jr. over Torian Prince, right? So
Yeah.
the trade off on offense for defense is just worth it. I do think based on the way Dame defended last season, when you look at what the rotation is right now, I don't think this is a team full of glaring holes defensively. I think it's a team with, again, like you said, Giannis obviously on the plus end of defense. You have, I think, a lot of players who are in the like passable to good range, which is fine. I mean, I think one of the big takeaways from like the Dallas run to the finals was maybe that's enough. Maybe like if your offensive players are truly transcendent and they just can't be guarded, passable's okay. Like you said, like is Paul George or Mikal Bridges or whoever gonna get up the shots that they want? Yeah, like can you just contest them? Can you make them mid rangers instead of open dunks like the Bucks gave up to start the year? If so, maybe you can just win enough anyway. I don't know. I think you'd love to just look at the team and be like, oh, they're the great two-way team. They're just like the Boston Celtics. That's really hard to do. There's a reason that
Yeah.
Boston was able to steamroll their way through. They had some great opportunistic trades, and that's why they're probably favored again for next season, right? Like you have to play into what you have. The Bucks have Dame and Giannis, so it's really about like what do you need between those two guys, right? So you need shooting, capable offensive players who are athletic enough to defend. I think you look at their main switches, and they got younger at all three of those vet moves as well, right? Torian Prince younger than Jay Crowder, DeLon Wright younger
Jay
than Pat
Crowder,
Bev.
Pat Bev. I mean, Gallinari
I think
obviously was playing
Gary Trent.
playoff minutes.
Oh yeah, you're certainly getting
In
younger
part
than
because of
Gallo no matter
Giannis.
what you do. And I believe Gary Trent Jr. is younger than Malik Beasley as
28.
well. 27 currently to 25 currently. So you got younger. I think you got more athletic and just frankly better at those three vets, which that's a pretty great offseason for three vet minimums.
Yeah,
We've got
that to me is. Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
No, that to me is like again, we have to reinforce the point of they had minimum contracts to offer, and their last signing, if you want to, the last roster spot available is their biggest move that they make. They're gonna be their starter. What more did you want from you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
if your move is to find your starting two guard as your last move to make this offseason, that's a pretty good move.
Yeah. I think so. I don't think the starters isn't really a question anymore, right?
No, I don't think so at all.
Which is funny because I feel like it's just progressed better and better through all three signings. Before any
Yeah,
signings, it's like, I guess it's going to be AJ Green or like an Ajax if he really pops. It's like, oh, DeLon Wright could do it. It's like, oh, Torian Prince. Okay, it got some flexibility there. That's like, oh, okay, Trent Jr. That's amazing. I think it's, again, I don't think it's a great fit wise in terms of like what you like the ideal player you'd want, but also the ideal player you'd want, yeah, I just want a two-way 6'7" wing who can guard 1 through 4 and knock down threes. Like, yeah, they weren't going to be able to sign that player. That player barely exists. I mean, if you have 6 first-round picks, you could have maybe traded for that player from the Brooklyn Nets, but without doing so, you were not going to find that player. I think for the options out there, they did great, and I think someone pointed out in chat here as we're live on YouTube, like they had a great, like one of the best, if not the best, starting lineup in the league last year with Beasley. It wasn't like they couldn't play at all with Beasley. Like they were really good. And you look at the best 4-man groups. They were, I think, number one for 4-man groups and 3-man groups
I
that played
believe
at least
so. Yeah.
500 minutes together. And it was Dame Christianis and of course Dame Christianis Brooke. I don't think Gary Trent Jr. Again, I think he's better than Beasley straight up, probably on both ends. So I think there's no reason to believe that group won't be even better than last year, especially now. You're not switching coaches midseason. You're not instituting, another new scheme that you've only had a couple months in. Dame and Giannis are going to get to work. I mean, Dame and Giannis didn't even have good chemistry last year, and they were great when they played together. They smoked teams when they played together. So yeah, I think they look excellent. I think now their depth, you feel a lot better about DeLon Wright, Torian Prince, Bobby Portis, probably AJ Green. I think then it's like the rest of the young guys are fighting Pat for that 10th man role. That's a pretty deep team.
Yeah, there's a lot of competition on this roster now, and I think that is ultimately what we wanted because
Yeah.
that's where you start losing the grip of contending for a title. You know what I mean? Like if you bank in on the four starters and then add in your fifth starter and then see who you have after that. Like I think for what the Bucks have done and what where they were entering, they couldn't again, they couldn't do more than what they had. But with Trent, I just think a lot of things make sense. It's not perfect,
Yeah.
but nothing, as you mentioned before, was going to be perfect. Like, oh, if this ideal two guard guy, kind of guy that ideally is longer and more athletic next to Dame, really, it's kind of you want to work your way up to beating Boston, but it's fighting alongside the Knicks and the Sixers of the world that I feel like they're kind of edging back towards in that same tier.
Yeah.
So yeah, to me, I like where the roster is at. I think, we talk about the young guys and we want just these developmental projects to kind of hit. Really, like now if for as much as we're kind of tired of all these like Bobby, Pat, and I'm getting tired of brick rumors just because, as I think we've mentioned in past pods, the center, you need a center, you need a big
Yeah.
guy. Look at the Pelicans; they're signing someone from like a draft pick from Europe that I'm like, who is this guy? And he's gonna be their backup big man.
He
They
might be
still
their starter.
need,
I mean, it's
yeah,
him and Tice right now.
the Bucks still need someone like Brook that can help them like that. And I think for where they're at, they have insurance now that if they package some people together, they can maybe
Yeah.
go after a more defensive minded player if
If they,
they
yeah.
need to go that way.
Yeah, I
But
think they're set up well at the deadline to have optionality, but not need to use it. Right? It's not
yes,
like this last season where I think you probably said this on our show like right after the deadline of like it was going to be almost impossible not to be disappointed because we felt there were just so many things that needed to be changed. And if you don't
yeah,
have draft picks, if you're a contending team, you have these big couple key salaries, you're not moving. It's really hard to do business at the deadline, right? You could never add Torian Prince, Gary Trent Jr., and DeLon Wright at the deadline. Like it just doesn't. You don't have the contracts to move out to bring them in. And this year, I think it's going to be more like you're going to play however many 30, 35 games, and we'll be in February going, okay, this need has emerged, right? X player has regressed, or X player has gotten hurt, or we have all this offense, but we do need the one more defense. Turns out we Andre Jackson Jr. isn't ready, and we need to move up. They'll be able to like, okay, let's consolidate into one more guy, the right fit. Do we need a backup center, whatever it may be. I think they're in that's a great point about just when you add three veterans who can play to some extent, right? I don't have any doubt in my mind. Gary Trent Jr., Torian Prince, DeLon Wright, these guys can play and help you. This isn't Jay Crowder who hadn't played in a year or some of these other various reclamation projects. It's like these guys have been useful players like last playoffs or last season. Like we've seen it very recently. So it does give you a lot more flexibility of like, okay, this isn't really working. Like we'll send out Pat and we won't be worried. Like we won't be like, oh, we could have used that steady wing player. Like you'll be able to make it work at this point. I think in terms of the young guy progression conversation, this is probably about the best place you could be for really trying to have young guys, but also trying to contend to win. You know, if we went into the season and it was like Giannis, Dame, Chris, and then like five young guys in the rotation, there's like real strong disaster potential there. And stronger than now, like you could say now, like, yeah, that the core guys could get hurt and you're screwed. That's true either way. That's true in like a scary way. If you're just relying on these young guys, they don't pop. Giannis misses some time. You might just be bad, like actually bad. And Bucks don't control any picks. It's all out in swaps. Like they can never afford to be bad. And also, that's the idea of like, if you're bad, Giannis and Dame may not want to play in Milwaukee, Wisconsin anymore, which you also don't want. But I don't think you could really afford relying on these guys who haven't totally proven it yet. None of these young guys have been like, I'm a starter in the NBA level contribution yet. It's been like fun flashes. I think they'll have an opportunity to play and opportunities. Like there's going to be times these guys are going to, we have a lot of old players. They're going to miss time. There's going to be opportunities to play. If you take advantage, you can get a rotation spot. If you don't, you don't. That's kind of how it has to be. I mean, the Bucks can't be in the business of just like, hey, 36th pick from last year, you're a starter now, no matter what. Like that's not feasible for any good team. And I'd rather be in this position than Denver, who you mentioned earlier, who basically are like, hey, Julian Strother, can you be our eighth man, sixth man, seventh man? Christian Braun, you're starting now on our contender who went out way too early. Peyton Watson, sixth man of the year. Can you please? Like, those guys haven't shown that. That's a really precarious spot for them to be in. I think the Bucks have done well to be like, our young guys can probably earn minutes here. There's spots, but we don't need them to win a playoff game.
No, I think having like Marjan go to summer league and he's done well, but then you realize, well, he's in year 3.
Yeah,
I mean, he has
shooting sub 40% from the field.
Yeah, and not to go off on a tangent about Marjan, but like his development, he was a developmental project based on just how he came to the league and that he lost a year of he was going to go to this program. I'm forgetting all the right details, but he left and like COVID happened, all this stuff. He lost a good year of like finding his way as a basketball player.
Yeah.
And you get drafted in the NBA after going to the G League Ignite and everything like that. Everybody's had their own path, but it's not like, again, when you're drafting as low as the Bucks have when they've drafted and have made little investment in making draft picks, it's really hard to expect those guys to pop. I mean, this year, everybody's going crazy. Like anytime I've read about like the draft and everything like that, it's like they made bigger swings in the draft this year with guys that need to physically develop, or the teams that they're on, they didn't play enough minutes, like AJ Johnson, or you're playing on a G League Ignite team that went 2-32 for Tyler Smith. These aren't the right developmental like settings to be like this pop, but they're making these swings that are going to take years to develop. We're farther away from seeing those guys actually become something if they ever do. So when you make those swings in the draft, you better hit on free agency. And as we have mentioned, with the very few resources that they have available, getting the glue guys like a DeLon Wright or Taurean Prince, who's steadily kind of blossomed into this like dependable rotational player. And now you're getting your fifth starter in Gary Trent Jr. with your last move of the offseason. Like for the two, it's always been about the 20, 24, 25 bucks. And I feel like the vision kind of makes a lot more sense with just getting someone like Gary Trent Jr. It's that simple for me to get someone that as good as he is with where the market's at. A lot of the guys I could talk myself into, like I was interested in like a Markelle Fultz, kind of like, hey, let's see that kind of flyer, or maybe go on like a Dennis Smith Jr. direction, but that was not nearly proven or anything like that. Getting a guy like Gary Trent Jr., who this summer has not been kind to him. I think I saw Michael Grange of Sportsnet. He was saying that he was asking for like $18 million a year, which is, you could have qualms about whether that was realistic or not. It obviously wasn't this year, but coming to Milwaukee where you're going to play for, hopefully a chance for a title and be a starter. Yeah, sign me up. It's worked in the past with Beasley, Bobby Portis, Brook Lopez, obviously. So why wouldn't it work with him?
Yeah. I mean, I think when you take an AJ Johnson at pick 23, you're basically, as John Horst saying, I'm going to find guys who are just going to play over whoever this is, right? Like and Milt Newton literally said after Tyler Smith, like, we're going to get our win now players in free agency. Like we know we have to do that. And I think that tells you, like, they didn't see Terrence Shannon Jr. as an NBA contributor, or whoever, Keyshawn George, whoever they liked. And I just, Terrence Shannon Jr. having a great summer league is still a 24-year-old dominating 19-year-olds with physicality. I'm just going to hold my horses a little bit on that one. I know people are already sick. I'm going to wait to see that in November before I'm really upset about that. I'm sure there is a player who goes after AJ Johnson who will help a team in year one. Maybe it is him, maybe it's not. Either way, I think the Bucks will be just fine not having Terrence Shannon Jr. on their roster this season. And I don't know. I don't know do the young guys need to play a ton to develop? I don't know necessarily if they do. They need to play some. But, I mean, I think if you're good, it's going to jump out that you're good at some point. And there's going to be an opportunity, and you're going to make the most of it. And I think it's just hard to find legitimately good players when you're drafting at 23, 33, 58, Chris Livingston,
60.
36, Andre Jackson Jr., at 60, uh, Sam Merrill, which they actually did find a pretty good player. That's an NBA player at 60 who and I've seen people go, oh, they lost Sam Merrill. What a waste. They traded Sam Merrill for Grayson Allen for Damian Lillard. So I don't know if it was a waste. I think this is a team that's been very creative with what folks in the media refer to as no assets, no flexibility. I mean, again, Denver was in pretty much the same spot, except could have paid KCP, chose not to. They had Fulberg, could have paid him, didn't. Added Dario Saric, okay, fine player, one fine player. Drafted Deron Holmes. I like Deron Holmes. Traded up for him. He got hurt. That's not their fault. I'm not going to hold that against them. But you bring in one rookie, Dario Saric. You re-sign Reggie Jackson. You're trying to trade for Russell Westbrook for some reason, and you haven't been able to do it yet. Like, I think there are teams that have sat on their hands. I don't think the Bucks are one of them ever. They've never really. I think you could make the case to the fault that they really never have sat on their hands and been aggressive with these moves, but you cannot fault the Bucks front office and John Horst for not doing everything they can to try and maximize Giannis's window. I think that's really all we can ask for as fans of the team.
Yeah, this is kind of it. There, I feel like you have to make as you mentioned, like you have to separate the process of this is what you have, this is how you're limited, this is how you're hamstrung, but you could still like go beyond, that level of like, well, that guy's not going to sign for this deal. Why would he do that? Well, then you sign Gary Trent Jr. and you shut down all the naysayers of like, that's just how it works. There's guys that fall through the cracks based on they thought that a big payday was coming their way or they didn't play as good the year before. Like Brook Lopez is that perfect example of gets traded to the Lakers after like starting to shoot threes. You think it would be this like big homecoming year for him. Lakers are the Lakers, and that whatever was alienating him, it just didn't work out for him. And he comes to Milwaukee, and they found the right fit. Like they've always been able to be opportunistic, even if it's been more aggressive. Like for every Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis signing, they whiffed on DJ Augustine, who got some big money, but they turned that into PJ Tucker. Like
Yeah.
they kind of have like this ability to go about their own way, and when it doesn't work, they own up to it. Let's fire their coach too. Um, like they have this kind of like magic eraser that, yes, sometimes it's not going to work out, but you can't blame them for not trying. Like they've always had this vision. I think that to your point, that's different than seeing like the Denvers of the world or even Miami. Like that's just been a weird offseason. Like even like kind of all the Butler stuff, that's more important than re-signing Hayward and Highsmith, obviously. But all the stuff with Butler is just kind of weird. Like it really with the new CBA, as much as it's been hit home over free agency and everything, it just shows you the haves and the have-nots. And I've
Yeah.
always, for all the things that we could say about, well, the Bucks aren't this great drafting team with John Horst, he's done more free agency moves with less than the Bucks have ever done. You know what I
Oh,
mean? Like
easily.
even when they've had big money, that's always been their Achilles heel, is that's how agents leverage you into, well, you got to pocket up more because your team is not that good, and then you sign Steven Jackson that you have to trade midway through the year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
he's done more with less, and really he's maximized them as trying to find these kind of diamonds in the rough, or the buy low guys that big Gary Trent Jr. is not the latest one of.
No. No. And I think, I just think I look back at Philly this last year, and basically they just had like a gap year after trading Harden, and it worked out. It worked out. They
Yep.
got Paul George. I mean, we'll see. We'll see how much it works out. But they have a great core now and everything else. But Embiid with the injuries, getting up to be like what 30 now or near 30 now, like just like you don't know how many more runs you've got. And I think they basically punted last year. They weren't aggressive at the deadline. They traded Harden for stuff to make a move later, and it didn't sit right with me then. And again, maybe it works out. Maybe it was all worth it in the end, and they win a title now. I'm just glad that there has never been a point since Giannis became this player where Horst and the Bucks have been like, yeah, this is a gap year. for us. I mean, they obviously weren't as good last year, but it was because they got Damian Lillard, and it wasn't like they planned to be bad for the year. You know what I mean? He's always flipped talent for talent. There's never been a like, okay, we're gonna trade Drew Holiday or Chris Middleton for picks, and then a year from now we'll figure out a player. Because hey, sometimes you don't get the player. I mean,
Yeah.
like if the Clippers are like not afraid of the second apron and don't think their team stinks, and they re-sign Paul George, I mean, the Sixers right now, like what? They're getting Brandon Ingram. They're getting DeMar DeRozan. Like, okay, maybe we would have just been better with James Harden this whole time, or whoever else over the years, or Jimmy Butler if we kept him in the first place. I love that the Bucks have never done that approach of like, we'll just get some picks, let's get some flexibility, and we'll figure it out in a year. They have put themselves in a position to contend. They haven't contended every year mostly because of injuries to Giannis himself, but they have been in a position. They've never approached it like, all right, this is going to be our off year, and then we'll be back on.
Really, like the only kind of comparable situation like they did that with was Brogdon. And
Yeah,
yeah, they didn't win a title that year. There was a lot of other things that happened that year, if nobody
yeah,
remembers correctly. Um, but before COVID happened and the league shut down and everything like that, I was about to say Packers, the Bucks were the number one seed
like
and went
56
on
and
this.
10 or something. I mean,
Yeah, they were sliding before the shutdown,
yeah,
but still, they weren't a worse for wear. And really, like, as much as I was, along with a lot of people, up in arms about the luxury tax and this, the same reasons that people are now going to talk about the second apron.
yeah.
Once they made that move and basically won the title that vaulted them into the luxury tax, it's not like they have gone away from it. PJ Tucker maybe is the closest one,
I was
but
thinking
you can
about
also
him the other day in the context of like, how bad would it feel if they were paying him $12 million a year these last couple of years, as well as Pat, to just not play?
I mean, that's the thing is the Heat year, they could have helped him, but I mean, you still were without Chris. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
They went 7 games against Boston without Chris Middleton and were up 3-2 after game 5. Like they could have still gone on to the conference finals. It's just the way that everything kind of works out.
that game 6 still hurts.
It
They had
does.
it. Yeah,
But I just think again, for all the things that we talk about the Bucks and just kind of what people pose as inactivity or not getting the sexy big free agent splashes or anything like that. Getting someone like Gary Trent Jr. helps them just kind of insulate everything around Giannis, Dame, Chris, Brooke, keep on going.
yeah. It makes
That was
everyone's lives a
always
lot easier offensively too. Everyone has to do a little bit less lifting now, which is huge for when we talk about injuries. When we talk about star players, like maybe we need a point less from Chris Giannis Dame this year. Like, what does that mean over the course of a year? I don't know. Like, I think no one knows the exact science of like the load management stuff. If they did, everyone would play, the optimal amount, and we'd all be healthy in the playoffs, and that'd be great. It's all got randomness to it. But I think generally having to do a little bit less every game is probably helpful to your overall load and wear throughout the season. We've got a little news here from Jamal Collier, ESPN.
I was about to bring this up. I think you're going to say the same exactly that I was going to say.
Dame was not the only recruiter here. Mr. Glenn Doc Rivers, the man with 1,000 connections, is one of those connections with Bucks coach, or with Gary's dad, Gary Trent Jr., of course. Rivers flew to Miami during the offseason to help recruit Trent to Milwaukee. So all this like, where's Doc been? I made the joke the other day, Doc skipped Summer League to do more podcasts. Rohan and I, if you haven't heard our last show, did horrible Doc Rivers impressions. We really just sounded like raspy old men. We didn't do good. But Doc's been working too, apparently. I had no idea. Again, we don't know some of these connections. I do feel like Doc and Dame just feel a lot more connected to players than the Bucks' last infrastructure. And I do think this year, maybe it's second apron, maybe it's middle class getting squeezed, but this is like 3 knockout vet min signings when we're used to like maybe 1 a year at most. Things are picking up a little bit with the Bucks able to add even more talent through that means. I do think some of it though is the apron too. Like I made this point the other day. The mini MLE is like barely bigger at this point. It is like 2 million bigger for Trent. So at that point, the Bucks are just like, we could try and dump a couple guys and make our team worse, or you could just sign here, right? Like, it's not night and day for these guys anymore. I think that matters a lot.
I mean, that's a lot. And kudos to Doc putting on his recruiting hat. We thank him for his efforts. This is what pays to be in the NBA for what, 40
55
years?
years,
Something
75
crazy.
years.
He's got to make some house calls. Let's call up Gary Trent Sr. Also,
Gary.
I maybe it wasn't. I was gonna make a joke. I was gonna make a joke that it was Lawrence Fishburne instead of Doc Rivers. But that doesn't make sense. But yeah, kudos for him to seal the deal.
Yeah.
And
Dame made the call. Doc made the trip. I mean, that's next level, man. They went out. They flew out to see him. Gotta love Glenn Doc Rivers. Bipolar Bear, who clearly listened to the last episode, goes, all I know is Doc got 3 free lunches from the vet min guys. Did you notice that too? He's like, lunch on you to DeLon Wright after he signed the vet min contract.
Yeah, he's like, this is
So that was our bit. Was Doc just like shows up to Team USA. He's like, Steve, I'll give a talk. I need my hotel room comped. He's just like going around getting free. He's out in Miami.
Where are we getting pretty? He's like Carl Weathers and the rest of them.
Yeah.
Like, do you have any food? Are we going to Burger King?
So Gary Sr., do you have a guest room for me or something down here in Miami? I came all this way. No, shout out to Doc. I mean, that's a big move. I think after the initial idea of Doc Rivers when the hiring process was happening and like panic. I mean, some of his interviews annoy me. That's fine. That doesn't really matter that much in the real scheme of basketball. I think he's done a pretty good job as the Bucks head coach. I thought he did a really good job in the playoffs. And I'm excited about the year of I think they did a nice job because they talked about the other thing with the trades idea. I mean, all the talk about from everyone, from Doc to the key players of we just want some stability. We just want some continuity. We want to work together. If you're trading Brook Lopez or even a Bobby Portis, that's a major change. These guys have been key players on the team for years now, since before the title, which is sadly feels like forever ago now. You bring back all your key vets, even Pat for now. We'll see. There was a world where they could dump Pat and maybe give Gary Trent Jr. the mini MLE. It has not been confirmed it's vet min. I mean, that technically could still happen. I'm not expecting that to happen for the reason I said earlier. Regardless, you're at this point, I think, bringing back all of your key vets, but with, I think, just significantly better versions of the old role players that clearly just had to go after last playoffs. I think that's a pretty good walk in the line between continuity. We're not tearing apart our team again. It's not going to be all new, but we needed some new talent here. We just did, and we have the young guys who can continue developing, and the new young guys who it's just soak it all in. Learn defense, get better, etc.
Yeah, you mentioned the good point of when the Bucks were around the trade deadline, and it led to the Pat Bev deal, basically just swapping minimum contracts with him and Cameron Payne. That was what 2.5 weeks after Doc took over.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, and you're trying to resuscitate the season with how it had gone and failing under expectations of just kind of being this contender again after. Making the move for Dame. This is gonna be you're loading up as much as you can with what little that you had, and now with Doc going into his first full year, he'll be able to assess what works, what he doesn't want, what the Bucks are willing to move on from. That's better than just kind of making that move by itself, and then having to pick up the pieces afterwards, because that can be where you continue losing, being a cat chasing its own tail kind of way. And I don't think any of us wanted that at all. As much as we kind of we want a new defensive scheme, we want this, we want that. It's well, if you make those moves, you got nothing. You don't have the security blanket of a Brook Lopez or a Bobby Portis off the bench, or moving on from Pat, who's it's up and down obviously since
really crucial in the real estate arena.
Yeah. Just be able to recruit him in a different way. But yeah, I just think it's better to load up as much as you can and then determine what you're willing to subtract or move on from if you have to make that, that move.
Yeah, and maybe it's for once like a real quiet deadline. Maybe it's if things work out well, maybe it's just like, okay, disgruntled young guy who said going to summer league was a sacrifice. Maybe we're just finding you a new home and that's about it. And shoring up the tax situation a little bit, like something like that, which I wouldn't be opposed to. I think again, it's I think that to me a transaction window should be what do you come out with as a whole, not just what do you
Yes.
add that cycle. I think when you start with Giannis, Dame, Chris, Brooke, Bobby, go down the list from there, the young guys, Pat Connaughton, like you don't need to add a ton for me to look at it as a big success. That's why for me, A plus off season. Like I think they had their continuity. I think they made valuable additions with little flexibility. I'm excited about the young core, even after a pretty disappointing first two games of summer league. I think they're in a good spot to where those guys can earn minutes, but they're not guaranteed minutes, which they shouldn't be because you're just too good. So yeah, pretty excited for the coming season.
Yeah, same here. I think obviously if there's any moves that are made, it's trades or
Yep.
whatever else may happen. But if this is the team that's going into the start of the season, I'm more than happy.
Yeah, I can't wait to watch him play. Like I just feel like the continuity plus conditioning part for Dame. I next to Trent now, like the offense, I just think Dame's gonna look ridiculous. I think Chris's efficiency, finally having a full health summer. We saw him as the
Also,
third guy.
big Chris point too is that considering everything that he's had to deal with since the championship, they have a lot of guys that can cover him that they don't have to
Yeah,
rely on him. We saw him in the playoffs as great as he was playing. There were multiple games where it looked like, did he just sprain something or did he
yeah,
just tear something? Like, are we gonna lose Chris again? Like,
yeah,
I feel like with him, especially because he's just been so physically limited by injuries and stuff, they have a lot more options to turn to, especially like Prince or now with Gary Trent that they can kind of play it easy and make sure that he's fully ready come playoff
yeah,
time.
100%. I think that's all we got. I mean, we're really excited. We'll continue breaking things down. I'm sure we'll be some combination of us. We'll be back talking about these summer league games at some point. But the Bucks got Gary Trent Jr. We're super excited. The fifth starter debate probably settled now, unless something
Over.
really
It
crazy
is
happens. I
over.
mean, I think it's over. Probably the most over it's been in years. To be honest, even when there was a guy locked in, we would still every couple months be like, maybe it should be this guy. Knowing the Bucks, maybe we'll end up there again. But I hope it's not because Gary Trent Jr. isn't playing well. I think he's going to be awesome. Thank you for watching on YouTube. Thank you for listening on podcast platforms. Double thank you if you did both. If you want even more GSPN content, go to gspn.info, our GSPN Premium. There is a bonus podcast every week. It's always a ton of fun. Last week we drafted Brewers All Stars, which not to toot my own horn, I really liked my team, but I think Newmark had a great team too. Usually I tear apart Newmark, but he had a good team there, so I'll tip the cap this time. But make sure to subscribe there for $8 a month. Subscribe wherever you listen or watch for free. We will be back very soon to talk more Bucks. As always, thank you for listening. Pod random, and we will talk to you next time.